Hip.
One, two, one, two. Hello. Welcome. Hello, please have a seat. Here we go. Full house tonight. So good evening, I'm Erik Gomez, and today I'm here because first, I'm member of 2030, but there are many members of 2030 and they're not coming on stage, but also I'm member of TheMerode, and I have the privilege to be the president of the advisory board. So with these two hats, I wish you all a very, very welcome. So I'm not going to present 2030 because Anne-Laure is just after me, and she's the CEO of 2030, and she's going to do that much better than myself. I'm just going to talk to you about TheMerode, because in that room, you have two types of people. You have the 2030 members, and you have the TheMerode members, and you have also a few guests. So I want to do a little bit of advertising for TheMerode. We are not only this beautiful building with always the sunshine, we are also the more exciting social club in Brussels. So in TheMerode, you are going always to meet people, like tonight. And also you are going always to learn something, like tonight. And when you learn something and you meet people, this makes you happy. So in TheMerode, basically what we do, we make happy people. So you are going to be happy tonight, and I wish you a very good evening.
Thank you very much, Denis, and welcome all of you. It's very pleasant to see that the house is full. Can I ask those who have empty seats to gather and get close one to the other, so we have room for people who would be arriving later on? So I'm Anne-Laure van der Wielen, and as Denis has said, I'm the CEO of 2030. I will be very brief on 2030. So we are a community of committed business leaders on a journey of collective learning and sharing for action on sustainability topics. All those in the room that you see with this wooden badge are members of 2030. So this is just a little teaser, and you can go ask around more information to those who have the badge. They will share with you their own experience of our community. Yes. So the key topic of tonight, doing business in a finite world with Patagonia. 2030 and TheMerode always strive to foster more out-of-the-box and systemic ways of thinking, to embrace today's harsh reality, and act towards more sustainability. For this, we need to address taboos and go beyond hard, entrenched convictions that we all have. In 2021, 2030 organized a conference with Tim Jackson and Emmanuel Faber, that most of you know, on a session called Beyond Growth with a question mark. This session can be found online if you are interested on our YouTube channel. It was lockdown, so it's all visual conference. But it was a very inspiring session. And 3 years later, it feels that this question of post-growth and alternatives to growth are still a taboo in many business and political environments. And we want to address it again and to imagine alternatives to growth, to have that real conversation on how businesses can deliver goods and services with the limits of the planet, hence our beautiful title. Therefore, today we have invited two very high keynote speakers, Vincent Stanley from Patagonia and Erik Gomez Baggethun from the International Society of Ecological Economics. And we are very happy that both in the room, it's full, and online, there were 120 people registered to follow us online. So hi to all of you also from distance. I will introduce you our two keynotes before presenting a little bit the program. I don't know if, yes, I don't see the forthcoming slides, but it's fine. So Vincent Stanley, you all know Patagonia brand, that outdoor recreational clothing. You probably all know also that advertisement that sell jackets telling the clients not to buy it. You probably all know that Patagonia has a boycott on Black Friday, and you probably also all know that in 2022, the company gave all the shares to one unique entity, the Earth, who is now the only shareholder of the company. Vincent Stanley has been in Patagonia since the very beginning, in 1973. He has assumed lots of key roles, such as head of sales or head of marketing. He has also supported our footprints that outlines social and environmental impacts of all the projects of Patagonia. But he's not only a business leader, he is also a writer. He has appeared in the Best American Poetry, and he's co-author with Yvon Chouinard of this book that you see here, The Responsible Company. They are for sale, so don't hesitate to pass by after the conference. He is the long-time storyteller of the company. You will see that it's really part of its speech, and he's a resident fellow at the Yale Center for Business and Environment. Today, he's director of philosophy of Patagonia, and probably the wisest man not in the room because he's from distance, but in the room and from distance. And so I would like a round of applause for Vincent, and thank you, Vincent, for being here with us tonight. Thank you. Now, more difficult, Erik Gomez Baggethun. He's a professor in environmental governance at the Norwegian Norwegian University of Life Sciences, and a senior research associate at the University of Oxford. His research covers topics in ecological economics, in environmental and sustainability sciences, with a specific focus on environmental values and post-growth economic. Ecological economics have been researching for more than 4 decades on how to embed the economy in the planetary boundaries, and he's a good leader in that sense. He's currently president-elect of the International Society for Ecological Economics and a lead author of the value assessment of the IPBES, which is the IPCC for biodiversity. But so I think that probably most of you have never heard of him. But he has been featured 5 years in a row on the Clarivate's list of the world's most highly cited researchers in economics and finance. So if you're part of the economic world and the finance world, it's quite interesting that maybe you've never heard of him. And this is really what we want to do in 2030, and in TheMerode, we try to build bridges between different spheres of society, and in 2030, especially between the business world and the academic world, putting light on very well-known researchers that we don't know in our bubbles. So this conversation has never happened before. We're really lucky and honored that both of you, Vincent and Erik, you've accepted to join us. And we invite you for this conversation to put your phones on the side, turn it off without having it vibrating in your pocket, and be fully present and curious to this exceptional encounter that we have. Quickly, how the night is going to flow. 5-minute presentation is probably 6. We have 25 minutes for Erik to present his research at the macroeconomic level. Then we'll have Vincent react on the presentation of Erik. and also introduce Patagonia in the context of Patagonia. We'll have a ping-pong conversation between our two keynotes, and then we'll have a few questions from the room. We'll try to have gender balance, so I really invite all of you to prepare a question. And then we'll have a closer. We'll give back the mic to the two keynotes on the final insight, and we'll close at 9. The bar will be open afterwards if you want to buy any drinks. This is all. Erik, the floor is yours. Round of applause, please.
Just this one. Hello, everyone, ladies and gentlemen, and thanks so much to the 2030 Alliance for the invitation, to TheMerode, and special thanks to Sibyl and Laure, Cyril, and the people that have been working hands-on with preparations with me. I'm honored to be here. I confess I was a bit reluctant to accept this invitation. I felt a little bit humbled. I don't work in business myself. I'm also an academic. You are more hands-on people. But I was persuaded by Sibyl that this was a meaningful forum to share these ideas. And although I have not been working on business explicitly in the core of my research, I've been devoted with passion for 2 decades to the study of ecological economics, which is the field in which I work. So I'll try to bring some insights from this field of knowledge to the discussion on sustainable business. So what is ecological economics? Basically, our mission is the idea of how can we create prosperity and secure decent lives, good lives for all within planetary boundaries, within the physical limits of the biosphere. This may be familiar to you. It's basically the core theoretical framework of ecological economics. And in a nutshell, the basic idea is that contrary to mainstream economics that often portrays the economy as a kind of self-sustaining system, we have to understand the economy as a subsystem of the biosphere that hence is subject to the physical limits of the biosphere. You cannot grow beyond the limits of the hosting ecosystem. This sounds very logical, but we tend to forget it sometimes. We live in an urban, technological society, and sometimes we have lost our awareness of the many ways on which we depend from nature. Everything we have in this room, all this stuff we see around comes from nature. It's energy and materials that we transform through the economy, and at some point we're dumping back to the economy as waste, okay? And mainstream economics has lost, to a large extent, this connection to the physical world. This is what ecological economics attempts to reestablish. One of the most powerful frameworks to communicate ecological economics idea is this donut from Kate Raworth. I won't use much time because to the reach of my understanding, most of you are already quite familiar with this idea. But fundamentally, the core elements of the framework is that if you want to move in this so-called safe and just operating space for humanity, there are 2 fundamental limits you need to respect. One is the so-called ecological ceiling, the ecological limits of the planet, but the other one is the social foundation, which basically means the basic human needs we need to have decent lives, good lives, or to what Georgescu Roegen, the father of ecological economics, called la joie de vivre. If we don't manage to get up here to this level, we are in a situation of social shortfall. But if we transgress the upper limit, we are in a situation of environmental overshoot. So the first one is not socially sustainable. The second one is not environmentally sustainable. Unfortunately, the situation, and this maybe you know as well, is that there is scientific consensus that several of these planetary boundaries have been already transgressed. And despite of that, many countries around the world are not meeting the basic needs of people. So actually, some studies are suggesting that there is no economy right now in the world operating within this safe and just operating space for humanity, so we have a huge task ahead. I would like then to land into the conversation of what, based on the thought of William Kapp, I have called here the business ecology contradiction. And much of the discussion we're having today is actually about trying to find an emergency exit to this contradiction. Let me put some troublesome propositions up front from the beginning, then we can relax a little bit and keep discussing. These propositions read as follows. For the first, the mainstream economic model, the one maximizing short-term profit, dividends, and market share, is in a structural conflict with the idea or with the aspiration to live in a safe and just operating space for humanity. Dominant financial metrics used to measure business success, revenues, profits, market share, and so on, often, albeit not always, correlate with human exploitation and environmental degradation. This is what I will bring through the idea of cost shifting that I will introduce later. And in the current accounting system, neither social costs nor social returns enter into the cost price calculations of most businesses, unless special provisions of these effects are made by law. So we have an economic system that keeps an accounting that is very strongly based on private costs and benefits, and there's a very huge diversion between these private costs and benefits and the social costs and the social returns from business operations. Bridging this gap is at the core of the sustainable business challenges. This said, I have been persuaded, mostly through my students that are very passionate about, especially my students in Oxford, very passionate about writing on sustainable business, sustainable finance, and so on, that business are keynotes of innovation that can be fundamental leverage point for transformative change for sustainability. Why? Well, because in the end, it's there where we make decisions of what is produced, how it is produced, and it's also the place where we decide how products are designed. For instance, for obsolescence or just to avoid it, right? And not least, it's the places where we work. So it's the place where many of us spend very substantial shares of our time. Other than sleeping, the workplace is the place where we spend most time in our lives. One important element that I need to stress here is that we live in an economic system that self-legitimizes itself, but having developed accounting systems that systematically register the positive side of production, how goods and services contribute to our prosperity, well-being, and so on, but that neglects many social and environmental costs that are the other side of the coin of the production process and of economic growth. So these costs very rarely appear in economic accounts, be national accounting through GDP accounts, but also neither in balance sheets, unless they are claimed through court cases or unless state regulations mandate their internalization. So in practice, these costs, which are very real and that can be quantified in many cases, are borne by third parties, future generations, the community as a whole, other species, and so on. Conventional economics have usually treated this problem through the idea of externalities. You know this notion of externalities? Are you familiar with it? I see some heads saying yes. Quite simply, an externality results when the actions of one individual or a firm or a business have an effect on the well-being or the profit of other individuals or other firms. Very often we talk about negative externalities. So if some of you are cyclists and move around Brussels in your bicycle, you will be the third party being affected by people transacting cars. But cyclists are not getting a compensation from these people, okay? So this is a negative externality and uncompensated environmental cost. But fortunately, there are not only negative externalities, there are also positive externalities. So if some of you are, for instance, a beekeeper, and you're producing honey, a side effect of your production activity will be that your bees will be pollinating the crops of the farmers around that area, and this will increase the productivity of agriculture, yet you are not being compensated for that, right? So this is what we call a social return or a positive externality. I was saying you are not being compensated, but actually this is slowly starting to change through instruments such as payments, so-called payments for ecosystem services that actually are designed to compensate for these collateral benefits of production. So to put this in a very simple example, decision makers to give green light or not to projects very often will command this cost-benefit analysis. What you see here is the cost-benefit analysis of a land use change, turning a mangrove forest into a shrimp farm. This is a case study conducted in Thailand. If you don't take into account these social costs and benefits, these externalities, this is what you would get. The mangrove forest provides little returns. The shrimp farming provides a commodity of high added value. The message going to decision making is very clear. Go ahead with this. This provides more benefits than costs. But if you include these social costs and benefits into the equation, things change drastically. So only by including the positive externalities of the mangrove in terms of carbon sequestration, biodiversity protection, and so on, these non-market benefits, already you would be outweighing the benefits from the shrimp farm. But if you also take into account the negative externalities, the unaccounted social costs of the shrimp farming, for instance, in terms of the nature you would have to restore or the pollution you would have to remediate, which most often are not incorporated into company operations, you could end up actually with net negative values according to the economists that conducted this study. So putting price tags on nature is a controversial practice, but whether we like it or not, taking or not externalities would make a fundamental difference in the way we make decisions towards the environment. So this idea has become entirely central to various reports from the economics of climate change, the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity, UN's report on the green economy. And the basic idea is always that if we can identify these externalities, if we can price them, and if we can articulate it into the economic systems through market-based instruments, we would have, market forces working in favor of sustainability. The basic message that is coming through from all these reports is that because of this bad accounting, because of this bad economic practice, we're basically making economically stupid decisions that will haunt us at some point in the future through impacts on GDP and so on. Nice story, convincing, persuading, but if we have been talking about externalities for 100 years, it was theorized already in the 1920s, why have we made so little progress so far? Some of the answers can be found, I believe, in a wonderful book from William Kapp called The Social Costs of Business Enterprise. And amazingly, it was written in the 1950s, the first edition, and it's extremely visionary. I very certainly recommend its readings. So Kapp did not see externalities as accidental market failures to be internalized in the price system, but as what he called cost-shifting gains, okay? Within the existing institutional setup, with the existing rules of the game, private entrepreneurs can have the ability to shift part of the cost of production to other persons, to the community, or to the community as a whole, thereby growing the private profit margins. So according to Kapp, capacity to pollute or deplete resources at zero cost may not reflect a market failure as much as a power asymmetry. So there is an element here of which are the rules defining the distribution of costs and benefits in business operations. One troublesome argument we find in this book is that since private profit places a premium on minimizing private cost of production, the greater the reliance on private incentives, the greater the probability of uncompensated socio-environmental costs. So this possibly explains why we have not made as much progress as we could hope after 100 years of talking about externalities. Because yes, as all these reports are saying, these economically stupid decisions may haunt us in the future, but actually, at present, these decisions pay for some people. And if this analysis is right, it actually illustrates a very large problem. Namely, that profit structures often, albeit not always, are structurally connected to the externalization of environmental costs. The larger your ability to externalize some of these costs, the more you will be able to increase your profit margins, the more competitive you will be in a market. which possibly explains why any effort to substantially alter these externalizations in practice have meant confronting formidable forces. If this is true again, climate change and biodiversity loss cannot be simply seen as an unfortunate side effect that can be fixed through accounting and market making, but actually, within the existing rule of the game, can be seen to be critical to the function of capitalism as we know it today. How are we responding to this problem? Sorry, I'm being quite upfront here in the way I see it. There are two fundamental ways we're responding to the problem. At the macro level, it's green growth. At the micro level, it's voluntary corporate social responsibility. And I will make the case here, and I'm sorry about that, that these are false solutions. It's not any longer environmental NGOs, activists, and so on. It's IPBES, the sister organization of IPCC in United Nations, that says in one of the last reports that it's precisely this focus on market values and short-term profit and economic growth that is coming at the expense of nature, society, and future generations. And it's encouraging to make fundamental changes in the way we make decisions in both public decision makings and at the level of companies and business. This kind of conflict was understood clearly 50 years ago, but the environmental movement and by this report that many of you will know of limits to growth. But things started to change with the Brundtland report, which brought the idea of sustainable development to the arena, where we can read that faster economic growth could be environmentally sustainable if industrialized nations can continue the shift of the content of their growth towards less material and less energy-intensive activities. The idea here is that technological progress, efficiency, would allow us to overcome these limits through technological innovations and so on, which is a kind of idea that still features very strongly in the business world and also in public decision-making. So for instance, economic growth still features centrally in the global development, sustainable development goals. The idea here is that at some point in the process of industrialization and so on, technological progress will allow for a so-called decoupling of economic growth from environmental impacts. At some point, we will be moving towards less material-intensive, less carbon-intensive kind of activities, digitalization, and so on. So this idea is predicting a dematerialized and a decarbonized economy where economic growth can go hand in hand with environmental conservation. However, this discourse, although it's very prominent, is very strong, clashes very strongly with the empirical evidence. And basically what we see here is that of the 193 countries recognized by UN, only 11 high-income countries have so far achieved so-called absolute decouplings between economic growth and carbon. But actually, this decoupling is very far from sufficient to meet the global sustainability targets of Paris and so on. Actually, at the existing rates, this content would need 220 years to decarbonize, to move into a net zero economy. And by that time, they would have consumed 27 times their fair shares of carbon space in the atmosphere if we want to reach the 1.5 or even the 2 degrees objective of Paris. When we look at materials, sorry, here again, our economy is not dematerializing. Actually, it's rematerializing. What we see is that the global material footprint has been rising drastically over the last decades, and without concerted political action, it is projected to basically double by 2060, okay? So yes, we have massive technological developments, but these technological developments have not resulted so far in a decarbonization or dematerialization of the economy. Our economy is increasingly carbon intensive. Our economy is increasingly material intensive. So despite all the talk about green growth, what we see is that there is no empirical evidence of sufficient absolute decoupling required to meet global environmental targets. At the microeconomic level, we can see, I think it's safe to say this, at least it's in the literature, in the scientific literature, is a kind of consensus that the leading approach to sustainability in business, through, for instance, corporate social responsibility and ESG, is failing to reverse climate change and ecological decline, often serving, you all know this, as a greenwashing machinery. Okay? I think this graph is interesting because you see how the exponential rise of corporate social responsibility in public discourse has made no effect whatsoever in the trends in carbonization. Okay? So what can we do then? And then I'm moving to more the propositive side of the presentation. So far by news and so on, but some good stuff coming as well. So how can we rethink business for a finite planet? Well, one of the things is that since this part of the world, high-income countries, are, according to scientists, already overshooting their fair shares to environmental space, to planetary boundaries, if we really want to move in that space of sustainability between decent, good living standards and environmental limits, some part of the world will need to decrease their production. We are not talking about decreases in GDP. We have a word for that in economics. It's called recession, and it's only bad news for everyone. We're talking about reductions of the physical size of the economy, okay? Of course, this kind of shrinking of the economy would have to be selective. It's not that the economy would shrink in all fronts, but possibly certain industries, such as industrial meat production, aviation, big cars and trucks, and so on, would have to degrow, whereas other industries, such as public transport, renewables, organic agriculture, arts, and others, would have space to keep growing, okay? So it's possibly in the or I would say in the right side of the graph where we have more opportunities for sustainable business. One of the tools that I very strongly recommend you to check, but I guess many of you have done already, is this donut design for business, which basically encourages to raise two questions. The first one is, how does the design of your business block transformative action? The second one is, how could a redesign of your business unlock transformative action to move towards this just and safe operating space for humanity? All this is material that is available online. If you have not gone through it, please do so, because it's extremely useful, it's very concrete, it's very constructive. And it encourages you to go through at least 5 fundamental questions. First, what is the purpose of your business? Is it just maximizing short-term profits, or do you want to produce certain environmental and social outcomes? Which are your networks? Who are you sleeping with in your business operations? Are you mostly networking with, actors pushing for minimizing tax paying or evading taxes, for maximizing short-term profits or so on? Or are you building networks that tries to build, long-term relationships with suppliers, with producers, and so on? What is the governance system of your business? Who is represented in the board? Do you have, for instance, your employees represented? Do you have the local people that will be affected by these productive activities? These are fundamental questions to raise. And what is your ownership system? Is it simply owned by shareholders, or are, for instance, employees and other affected stakeholders having a say with this? And last but not least, what are you doing with the money, with the prosperity, with the wealth you are creating? Is everything going to shareholders, or are you actually providing fair shares to your employees, to suppliers, and all the actors across the supply chains? All these are fundamental questions to raise if we want to move towards sustainable business. One question that is coming very strongly, and I'm moving now towards the end of the presentation, is the idea that with the state of the environment that scientists are referring to, it's not enough simply to, we have been moving in this kind of domain. This, I could say, the first generation of business. Many are moving into this second generation of business that you are trying to minimize your impacts, move towards zero carbon, and so on. But there is, I would say, a more visionary business ideal that wants to go to what we could call a third generation of business that attempts to be regenerative by design. Not only, in this misuse of the word sustainable as reducing your harm, but actually having a net positive effect on the environment. There is increasing, I don't know how familiar you are with this, but in the scientific literature, for instance, there is increasing talk about the so-called sustainability-oriented hybrid organizations, SOHOs, that could be part of this kind of third generation of business models. No? So we have here, and I like this idea, this representation across 3 axes. What is the time scale that is being considered? What is the logic behind the business? And what is your impact? No? So I like very much this idea of this sustainability-oriented hybrid organization where providing social and environmental benefits and returns are an explicitly part of the mission. You are looking at a long-term project that includes future generations and global socio-ecological processes, and you are attempting not only to reduce your harm, but actually to become net positive. And here we have it, the idea, and I know this is a difficult idea to digest. Very often in the business world, it's very strongly structured around the dynamics of economic growth. I know that the idea of degrowth, décroissance, l'enfant terrible of ecological economics, it's a controversial thing to discuss, but believe me, I can see how things have been moving so quickly in the last decade. This is a new player in town, and it's here to stay for a while. You may hate it, you may love it, but you can no longer ignore it. It's become part of the discussion. No growth business, degrowth business is already here, is being discussed by political parties, by companies, by academics, and so on. I don't know if you have heard of Profil. They provide consultancy, they provide advice to business moving into sustainable business. They recommend certain principles for a post-growth business, set strategic goals related to sustainability, define purpose and develop governance to support these goals, use evaluation and accounting to measure sustainable performance and guide decision-making, and abandon or transform unsustainable activities. More explicitly, ideas around degrowth, and there's a blooming literature around this idea. There's a lot of discussion about how you can apply degrowth or post-growth principles to business operations. One, and I think it may be difficult to digest, but there are more and more people incorporating this into their ideals and mission, is abandon the idea of endless accumulations as the business purpose. Apply maximum and minimum ratios. This is something that has gone a little bit out of hands. We all have a sense for the meritocratic argument that, competent people working hard and so on should get more than people not doing so, people having more responsibility. But how much should be the ratio between the best paid and the worst paid person in the company? Should it be 1 to 10? Should it be 1 to 15? In US corporate sector, we find ratios 1 to 2,000 in salaries within one company. If you earn 100 times more than another person in your company and you are still not happy, you don't need more incentives, you need possibly, I don't know, a competent psychologist or something. Reorient production to satisfy basic needs and strive for democratic firm ownership, for example, through cooperatives or employee stock ownership plans. Last but not least, working time reductions. This is a debate that is coming everywhere. We're interested in working better, but many are also interested in working a little bit less, and productivity gains through technological development allow us for this possibility. Part of this productivity dividend doesn't always have to be reinvested in growth and consumption. It can also be invested in liberating a little bit of our time. I finish with this sentence from Jay Forrester. He said, one of the biggest management problems is going to be to understand how to manage a successful non-growing company. I don't have the answer to these questions, but I guess some of you may provide answers to these questions in the year to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Erik.
Shall I just go down?
I invite you to sit down on the right-hand side. I'll sit next to you, actually. And I think we can have, I will keep the zap bit. We can have Vincent coming on our screen. It is a thank you note, sorry. Vincent, are you there? Thank you very much, Erik.
Yes,
Vincent, do you
I'm
hear
back.
us?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm right behind you.
I see you. I see you, thank you. Vincent, have you been following what Erik has presented?
Yes,
Hopefully.
yeah,
I would
it's
like
quite
to
an
invite you to
excellent
react.
presentation. Yeah, go ahead.
And I was mentioning both rationally and or emotionally, if you want to.
Well, there are several. It's interesting because some of you were in an earlier talk I gave here, and there's so many points at which the lessons that we've learned at Patagonia dovetail with Erik's research and thinking. A couple of them I think are really important, and I think one connects to purpose, and purpose has become kind of a bad buzzword in business because it's used very loosely. But if a business has only the purpose to make short-term profit, it has to be a bad social and environmental actor, which I think is what Erik's research is demonstrating. So, in other words, okay, if we look at the big picture, who are the three big players in an economy? And one is business, the second is civil society, of which Erik is a part, and the third is government. And the government is responsible for setting a fair playing field. And what businesses are good at is they know how to deploy capital, they're nimble, and they can be self-sufficient. So we can engage in useful activities, if we choose, that are self-sustaining, that we don't have to go to the government to raise taxes for, and we don't have to go to rich people to provide the funds. But purpose is absolutely key. If a business does not have a social and environmental purpose that is somewhat in line with what we need more of in the world, then that business is not going to be a good player. And if that business is not going to be a good player, then it seems to me it has absolutely the responsibility to clean up after itself, and that has to be the role of government to ensure that businesses do that. If you're making something that is really not necessary, it has to be done in a way that you clean up after yourselves and what you do to the environment, and you don't harm your employees. The other thing that Erik touched on that I'm really interested in, we haven't used, we try to avoid using the word sustainable, and we have for years. And that is because we understood that as an apparel company, as I mentioned earlier, that everything we do takes more from the planet than we know how to give back. So everything we've been doing for a long time is to reduce the adverse environmental impact that we have. And we don't like the word sustainable because the implication is that if you're engaged in the activity of trying to reduce the environmental and social harm you do, that you're somehow doing good. And really all you're doing is reducing the harm you do. But the idea of regenerative, I think, is really key. And this is one of the things we discovered when we got into the food business in a small way, is that if you grow food in a way that rebuilds topsoil, if you abjure chemicals, if you use crop rotation and minimal tillage and companion planting, all those things can build topsoil faster than nature can, which is really kind of a tremendous way. So we're actually giving back to nature as much as we're taking. And the key lesson for me is, okay, if you want to be sustainable, you have to be regenerative. That's what you have to do first. There is no sustainability without regenerating both human communities and the natural world. The other thing that, a couple of things to, just a couple of things to touch on. One is, John Elkington came up with the phrase triple bottom line 30 years ago, people, profit, planet. And a lot of companies were looking at that. And Erik was talking about the whole system of accounting, which is really based on how much money you make, or how the return on your assets and all that. Well, these accounting principles were developed 700 years ago by a Florentine monk who was Leonardo da Vinci's mentor. We've had 700 years to develop, refine, and engage with these practices. And we've only been talking for the last 20, 30, 40 years about the impact, the social impact, and the environmental impact of companies, and we really don't know how to measure it. So Elkington recently issued a recall of the concept of triple bottom line, because he said, listen, people are using it to greenwash. They're not using it. There is no set system. And it's not though, as people haven't tried. There have been several accounting systems that try to develop this, but we shouldn't kid ourselves. Businesses don't know how to measure it. And then the last thing I want to mention is kind of just in relation to degrowth and our whole idea of the economy. This is something has been pointed out a long time ago, but the words ecology and economy share the same Greek root, oikos, which is the household. So ecology is the study of the household. Economy is the management of the household, if you want to take it down to its basic level. And we really have to think about the values ourselves as part of nature and ourselves among ourselves, how we treat each other. As those values precede the values of making a profit. We have, as businesses, we have to make a profit. If you're a household, you have to manage your money so you can feed people and eventually retire. But these values, the human values, but also the values of human beings as part of the natural world have to come first. And one thing that Erik didn't mention that I keep kind of tossing around in my mind, it's very controversial, but as we develop, Erik referred to technology that in some ways creates the potential of more efficiency as robots do more of the work, AI does more of the work. We've got the potential for decoupling labor from productivity. And when we do that, we have the potential for a universal basic income that doesn't hurt the economy, and that in some ways can be absolutely critical to restoring health, because what we have now is that some of the most critical functions in a society are vastly underpaid because they don't return money. So this I see as this is something that we really strongly need, is the ability to reward people for work that has tremendous social and environmental benefit. And the only other thing I would point out is that when you look at the fact that we're not decarbonizing the economy, it's important to remember that population has doubled since I started work, from 4 billion to 8 billion. And that the size of the economy, relative to 1960s is 10 to 20 times as much. And so we really are facing absolute limits. We've adopted practices at a tremendous speed that neither we as a species nor nature can absorb.
Thank you, Vincent. Thank you. I guess Erik already wants to jump in, but I would like to let you just speak maybe 3 minutes about Patagonia also, because most of the crowd were not there during the first part of the evening. So if you want to give a few words also on Patagonia and Patagonia in the finite world, would be happy to hear it.
Okay. Yes. I think So we started off as a mountain climbing equipment company, not as an apparel company. And so we were really a very small business when I started. I think we had 10 employees and way less than $1 million in sales. And we had a very intimate relationship to the sport that we were serving and to the customers. I mentioned then that I would sit in the yard inspecting ice axes for hairline fractures and feel the responsibility that if I fell asleep on the job, someone would get hurt and that person would be a friend or a friend of a friend. So we started from that basis. We didn't start from a bunch of people sitting in a room saying, okay, this is going to be a great way to make money. We started from people who were climbers. My Yvon Chouinard, my uncle, started as a teenager in his backyard borrowing money from his parents to make equipment that he needed, that he wanted to design for his sport. Most business, I think, has emerged from that kind of workshop atmosphere, but not in the past 100 years. As we've developed larger and larger corporations, we fall away from that. Nevertheless, what Patagonia developed is when we got into clothing, which was essentially to pay for the climbing business, is we got into a very deep supply chain. And so there were, when you're engaged in, so traditionally American manufacturing grew up, like the whole automobile business grew up out of bicycle manufacturers in Ohio and Michigan. So, you know, there were tremendous labor battles, but the laborers and the managers all lived in the same town. You no longer have that. So it took us a long time to figure out what the labor conditions were in the assembly factories that were offshore and what the environmental conditions were in the mills that did the dyes and processes for making fabrics. The education was usually involuntary. We stumbled into virtue. We would find out that we were doing something, that our product was causing some harm in some part of the world that we did not want to go on. So we asked ourselves, is there an alternative? And then we made the changes. And this became a habit. And in a way, for the past 10 or 12 years, it's become the business model because the constraints that we place on ourselves in terms of ensuring that labor is fairly paid and treated and ensuring that the environmental damage is minimal in the apparel business, they force us to think, to change our practices rather than become mindlessly more efficient. You know, it's very easy to, in the apparel business, to go to your suppliers and say, okay, I want you to cut your prices 3 to 4%, and then do that again 6 months from now, and that's going to increase my profits. We never had that as an excuse. So that led, and I'm sorry, it's very difficult to describe the company in a couple of minutes, but the evolution of the company has been toward this business model. And in our new food business, the business model is that every new product has to solve a problem in the food system or in agriculture, which is, that's regenerative. That's the tendency of regenerative business, and we're not there yet in apparel. But it has also led us to adopt the rather radical mission statement of a few years ago, we're in business to save our home planet, which creates a kind of discipline inside the company that we really can't violate that. We don't inhabit that entirely yet, but we really want to move toward that. And as I mentioned in the earlier session, I was very skeptical about the aspirational nature of that language, but what I saw is that our employees really took it to heart and started to ask about that for their teams. I think one of the things that we really realized, so now that we've taken that mission statement and we've changed the structure of the company, so the owners, the Chouinard family that owned all of the stock, has donated that to essentially a foundation. And what would ordinarily be shareholder profits are distributed to environmental projects. So what is not reinvested in the company, what is not distributed to the employees as bonuses, is now entirely deployed for environmental purposes. So, I want to just, one last thing, and then I welcome Erik's interaction, but I think one of the things that the failures of capitalism and the global economy of the past 50 years has been that we create these decisions in the world capitals or in the business capitals abstractly because of a global economy, but they always play out in a particular place. The pollution is felt by a river. You know, the way you design a car in Detroit will affect the way that car pollutes in a particular place. And I think one of the things that we really have to recover, and when we start to talk about degrowth in the economy or changing the economy, is to restore the agency of communities and smaller geographical entities to create their own economy or to have some say over how that economy works, and to favor small and medium enterprises, smallholder farming as opposed to industrial agriculture. There again, our whole economic structure does not support giving people a decent living when they're not generating huge amounts of money.
Thank you, Vincent. I see Erik has written already a lot of things on the paper I've just given him. I just wanted to recall also key topics that we have discussed also in 2030, technology, minimum wage, minimum universal income, and population. So I think very redundant in the conversation, but I'll let you react.
Thank you very much.
Good luck.
Thanks so much, Vincent. I may be a boring discussion because I agree with most things you said. So I don't have so many things to confront you, but I can comment on some of the elements you brought into the discussion. One thing that you brought in your first comment, I was tempted to bring it into the presentation, but it was already too long, is the role of regulators. It's a kind of boring conversation. Nobody likes to be regulated. I don't want to be regulated. My kids don't want to be regulated, but we have to regulate our kids a little bit. We have to put some limits, no? And maybe this is very basic what I'm saying here, but why I believe it's so fundamental, this role of regulators in the transition towards sustainable business, is to put it in very simple words, because without these regulations leveling out the playing field, the good guys will always be outcompeted by the bad guys. And this is what I think is so important with this book from William Kapp, that is explaining this structural connection, which is not unavoidable. It's not always, it doesn't need to be there always, but within the existing institutional setup, there is indeed, in many cases, a structural connection between cost shifting by companies and profit margins, okay? So, in the absence of this regulation, these companies that are internalizing this cost to minimize social and environmental harm will be outcompeted by those which are not doing this. And this is one of the reasons why I believe we need these regulations to protect companies that are getting serious about green business, sustainable business. And this is part of the reason why ecological economists like Herman Daly, since the 1990s, when this was an entire taboo because, free trade was the only credo, and so on, were bringing, for instance, the idea of environmental tariffs as a policy to protect national green industries. And some people freak out at hearing about tariffs and so on. Oh, this is what Trump wants and so on. Yes, Trump is suggesting tariffs, but for an entirely different rationale. This is not responding to a rationale of economic nationalism. It's actually responding to a rationale of protecting the global environmental commons. If you are not protecting your industries, your companies that are actually internalizing this cost, they will be again outcompeting through free trade by companies that are just, outsourcing or shifting out these costs. the issue of technology, it's a fundamental element of the discussion. I'm not, maybe you could read between the lines, I'm not a big fan of capitalism, but I admire capitalism in some respects. One of them is its ability to innovate. It's such a powerful, no other mode of production throughout history has managed to align this set of incentives for such a dynamic element into innovation and technological progress. There is one passage in a book from Karl Marx, the German ideology. Karl Marx was a technological optimist. He thought capitalism was actually restricting our ability to maximize production and to liberate productive forces and technology and so on. But he has this visionary passage in the German ideology when he says, no other mode of production in history has been able to deploy productive forces as capitalism, but at the same time, our technological developments are also liberating, deploying destructive forces of comparable magnitude. So technology, of course, it will play a fundamental role in the transition towards sustainability, but we have to understand this dual nature that is both productive and destructive. And I think one of the problems is that despite massive technological developments, they are not being cautiously directed actually towards these particular purposes, okay? One of the elements that possibly explains why technological development has not given the results that we were hoping for green growth and so on is the so-called GVOX paradox. I don't know if you have ever heard of it. You're maybe more familiar with the concept of rebound effects, no? Stanley Gibbons observed empirically the paradox that in England, each time we had a technological development that increased efficiency in the use of coal stocks, we ended using up more coal. Why? Because through this efficiency, we reduce the amount of energy to produce 1 unit of production, but at the same time, we can also produce cheaper. This stimulates demand, so in the end, we produce more cars. So yes, we use less energy for 1 car, but we produce more cars, we use more energy. And this kind of dynamics, we observe it all the time in the functioning of market operations. If there is no kind of regulatory framework behind, if we just let it to the workings of the free market system, these efficiency improvements will be very often offset by increases in production scale. Basic income, fascinating. I think this is going to be the next big reform of the welfare states. It seems, I mean, this was entirely utopian 20 years ago, and now you see through the whole ideological spectrum voices supporting this. I'm not a very big fan of basic income. I think it would be an improvement relative to the present situation. But I believe that economy should be always organized in a way where there should be a certain balance between what you are contributing and what you are receiving, okay? And we tend to think this is a kind of meritocratic liberal argument, but it's a kind of common sense that we find through the whole ideological spectrum. The whole theory of exploitation in Marx is precisely based on this idea, that workers, employees are not getting the full value of their work, that there is an imbalance between what you give and what you get. So this idea that you should have an unconditional basic income, for me, it clashes a little bit with this common sense understanding that there should always be a balance of what you contribute and what you get in reward, no? So I'm more interested in the idea of, you know, what is the necessary amount of work that we need to do to keep society working, you know, with decent living standards and so on. And then let's see how many hours we need to put each of us before we can earn a basic income. Now we are working around 80,000 hours in our life course. Maybe we could work 40,000, no? But let's share it rather than just give money for nothing.
Shortly.
Yes, final comment, if I may. You said something that I really loved, Vincent, which is the idea of giving back to nature. And I love to see this discussion going on in the business dialogue. Last year, I was in United Nations, the Day of the Earth in New York. We were trying to make the case for an Earth Assembly that gives voice to nature. You might be aware that one of the strongest legal developments we've seen when it comes to the environment in recent times is that some countries are granting rights to nature, to rivers, to ecosystems, and so on. Some of you may be saying, well, but how can you give rights to nature? Nature cannot defend itself. No, but babies cannot defend themselves either, but a steward can go to court and defend a baby or a kid or a child. So you can have this kind of dynamics also in the economy and so on. So this idea of giving a voice to nature, for instance, in the board of business, I think it's revolutionary in that sense. And you said something that I find fundamentally important, which is the idea of giving back to nature. And if you read the literature on sustainability science, there's a lot of discussion around, much of the problems with sustainability are rooted in deeply seated values of the Western tradition of thought. The idea that we should relate to nature from a perspective that is anthropocentric, utilitarian. Nature is there to serve us, and we don't raise the question of what we have to give back to nature. I'm tempted to continue, but I open the floor to others. Thank you, Vincent.
No, I wonder if Vincent, you want to react one more time before we open to Q&A, and we'll take like patches of 3 questions.
Yeah.
Women,
thank you. This is very interesting, and I think we should open up to the whole group.
You opened it, okay. Well, Vincent has decided. So I think there are 2 people ready for mics, perfect. And we're gonna have questions, so raise your hand for those who have questions, and we're gonna have 3 of them for the moment. So I see Quentin, 1. Over there behind the camera, I don't see, but yes, over there. And a woman, it's 2 guys. Over there, thank you. We can have, the mic is over there already. We can have this one first. Yeah, Cyril.
Thank you. I'm Piotr Bonisławski, I'm a member of TheMerode. Thank you for a very interesting presentation. So I understand that this debate is mainly focused on what we call these days Western business circles and so the Western part of the world. To what extent you see resonating this kind of ideas in some places, which I think more and more will be, let's say, detrimental to how the economic growth is happening on this planet, so Asia and beyond, and Africa as well.
Thank you for the questions. We take a second one. Vincent and Erik, if you need to write down. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm Amélie Faucon. I just have a question. I was struck by your first line. You said that you were hesitating to come because as a researcher you don't feel so linked to businesses. And I was in academia before, and now I'm in policy making, and I realized that research and researchers kind of struggle to make their voice to policymakers, to businesses. And I was wondering how and why, do you have an idea about the why, and how can that change? And then I had a related question to Vincent. Have you also been impacted by research, and have you been, have you used the research to make changes in your company? So yeah, this is my question.
Thank you for the question. And then the third one, I think was, Quentin.
Hi everyone, Quentin from The Shifters. Thanks Vincent, and thanks Erik for the conversation. I actually have a similar question than the one here, but more linked to the intimacy link that you were describing between businesses and government in the current structural economic system. We have a very strong link between those 2 actors, and I was wondering if ecological economics actually studies the link of lobbies or the influence of lobbies in between guaranteeing the share or the equilibrium in between the 3 actors that you were mentioning. So same question from a business point of view rather than a research point of view.
Thank you. We'll get 3 more questions afterwards. Vincent, you have the floor, and then Erik, if you want to react.
Well, in relation to the last two questions, first of all, I didn't mention this, but I think Erik is quite right that the government is going to have to come up to the plate, and probably the European Union will be the first to do that because the American Congress won't. But a lot of the laws governing what a playing field for the apparel business, for instance, really concentrate on transparency rather than regulating practices. And I think we're really going to have some rules about practices. And those regulations are going to have to be smart, because one of the things that happens is you get regulations that are made that don't make sense 2 years later. So you need an iterative process similar to what business uses to find out how those regulations are actually playing, where the unintended consequences are, and how you correct them. In terms of, I mean, Asia and Africa are two very different economies, particularly what we think of Africa as sub-Saharan. But in Asia, I think that it's more complicated than we think. I mean, I think the line was, the sort of line of thinking is, well, Western economies, US, Europe and Japan have made themselves rich, and now they want to prevent the rest of the world from becoming rich. I don't think that the Asians actually see it that way. In particular, they might see it that way in India, but they don't see it that way in China. They no longer see it that way in Korea and other places that have developed economies. They're looking at things the same way we're discussing them today. Not all of business is, but all of these concerns are global among developed economies. And when you get to economies that are still based on extraction, mostly of minerals and oil, that's another question. And I really don't know how to enough about that to talk about it. Erik might have some interesting things to say. The Patagonia has used a lot of research. I mean, I think when it comes to us, it's a lot of what we talk about has come to us sort of combination of experience. We learn things on our own on this very practical basis, and then we read sources that confirm, and in many cases we're drafting off of what people have been talking about for a long time, and we're kind of touching in and developing the conversation in our own way. So what happens in the academic world, what happens among writers, what happens among ecologists, what happens among economic environmentalists, that's all very critical for our work.
Thank you, Vincent. Erik?
Maybe, I think Vincent already gave comprehensive answers, but I could elaborate maybe on the question that was raised on this disconnection, no, between academia, the business world, and so on. I think there are different reasons for that. One has to do with reluctance in part of the academia, or maybe the fear or concern that academic freedom can be compromised by making too strong links with the business world. So this is something that is happening already. So business are sitting in the boards of universities. Science is moving more and more from basic science towards applied science, and commercial interests are featuring stronger in knowledge production in academia, and there is some reluctance to this in certain academic sectors. But quite importantly, I believe, and to do some self-criticism, I think the other big problem is the tendency of academia to shelter itself in its marble tower. And here incentive structures have also played a role. We're constantly given incentives to publish and to communicate with other scientists in conferences, scientific papers, and so on. But despite the rhetorics, there's no real incentives for us to go out and engage with business, civil society, and so on. And this is the kind of things we do out of passion or in our free time and so on. But it's not really part of the incentives of that academics have nowadays in the way academia works. And I think this is very, very troublesome because sometimes we're producing knowledge in a way that is more and more disconnected to the actual needs of society sometimes. And we are also losing capacity. I mean, we're sometimes terrible to communicate our ideas outside academic circles. So I think it's extremely important that we push ourselves out of that marble tower, but also universities have to take some action there by providing incentives for us to use more time for popularization, communication, and engagement with civil actors.
I promise you did a great job.
Thank you.
So we'll have 3 more questions. And I'll try to balance out 2 males, 1 female. Here, 1 woman. Over there. And then on the other side, but I see the question, first row here, lysis.
So thanks a lot for the very interesting presentations. I have a question which is related to the business world, but not entirely. So I am a company director. I'm an executive director of the Institute of Directors in Belgium, which is an academic institute, but also a legal expert. And so because you were talking about regulations, and the role of regulation, my question would be, how do you see this in an ideal world, without taking into account political considerations, because then it will get very difficult. How would you see this ideal regulation? Would this regulation be pure normative regulation, so correcting what is going wrong afterwards? Or would this regulation, and then I'm linking with the donut economy, would this be working at the level of the license to operate, and so make sure that only those companies, because companies, I'm very sorry to say so, but they're a legal fiction, they're not an economical invention, that companies can all only operate if they stay within this very thin line of a safe and safe space for everyone. So what would be your, as an economist, so it's a question for the economist, what would be your opinion on that?
Thank you. So we'll have the question here while the mic goes, Cyril, back there. Yes, the woman there with short hair. And yeah, the mic is there.
Thank you for the presentation. My name is Lionel Frankfurt. So you're talking about a radical shift, and this shift should be made by people making regulators, financial markets, academia, but also in business. What would be, in your eyes, key dimensions that people should change in themselves for making this happen?
Thank you for the question. Oh, and then the last one.
Hi, thank you very much for your words so far this evening. My question is, how do companies emulate Patagonia? Can regulation go far enough to achieve that level? And if not, what is it? And especially for companies that drive economies. Thank you.
Thank you. So Eric, you want to start this time?
Okay.
Vincent is laughing.
I think they are very difficult questions, to be honest, difficult to answer. What can we do at the individual level? I think one thing that is embedded in the title of this seminar is how can we reconciliate ourselves, our culture, with the idea of limits? At the level of macroeconomy, but also at the level of business operations and at the level of individual lives, no? We know many examples of cultures of limits. In our cultural context, the old Greece has often been cited as, as a culture of limits, where philosophical and political and economic systems were structured, where the idea of limits had a positive connotation. But much of the history of modernity has been actually trying to get rid of all limits, no? And limits today are not cool. They don't have a positive connotation. If we see the whole advertisement industry and so on, it's always the idea of, freeing ourselves of these limits and so on. And I think this idea of reconciling our culture, but also our lifestyles with this notion of limits, that, for instance, with the notion of sufficiency, how much is enough for a decent life, I think it's really at the core of the whole problem. What are the limits we need to run decent lives? And it's extremely difficult because I think much of our culture is, and much of the discourse around technology and so on is always the idea about overcoming limits. No? So I would say that would be one of the fundamental questions to address. Sorry, could you very briefly recap me the first question?
From Sandra.
Yeah. Yes. Regulations.
And social license.
Okay. Very often we talk about 3 levels of action, informational. Are we really providing enough information for private actors to be able to move in the green direction and so on? The second one would be incentives, right? The third one would be regulations. And I think we have to work with this policy mix of the 3 in order to move into that direction. And I think it's really important that both regulations and incentives are in place, because if I don't buy the story, and I don't buy it at all, the sort of liberal Hobbesian story that we're just selfish people trying to maximize our interest and that we compete and eat each other and so on. I don't buy it, but I don't buy either the idealization of people. I think we have to have moderate expectations of what we can expect from people and from companies, and we don't want an economy organized by heroes. We want an economy run by normal people that have, a regulatory framework and an incentive framework that, helps them make normal decisions to be rational, not to be enormous sacrifices and so on. No? So I think this is really important that thing is in place, because nowadays it seems like running a green business is a sort of heroic act. No, it shouldn't be like that. We should have the playing field in a way that should be the normal way of running things.
Thank you, Erik. I think the third question was for Vincent.
Yes.
Vincent, you have the floor.
Yeah. I think that I think that earlier I had mentioned there's a movement called the B Corp movement of companies that actually write their values, their most deeply held values, into their articles of incorporation and their business charter, and submit to an assessment every 2 or 3 years. That actually it's been very interesting for us. We've been a B Corp for a dozen years, and it's the only holistic look we have at all our practices, for everything from whether we're using permeable pavers in our parking lot to the ratio of the pay of the CEO to the lowest paid worker. I think that movement, for people who admire Patagonia as a business, I think that movement provides a place where people can be allies, can draft off of each other, and can also develop practices that we haven't had in place for a very long time in business. I would go back to the second question, if I can, just a little bit. What Erik was mentioning, this change in individuals. I think one of the things that we face is kind of a fear of missing out. Erik touched on that, and people don't want to have limits, but we've also described those limits as not having, among the people who come to this conference. If I read the New York Times, people want to be able to go to the hot restaurant. They want to know what the what the particular fashion is. They want to know what the latest health information on how they can exercise or what they should eat. We don't have the same level of permission for demand for fewer restraints on the commons, for fewer restraints on our time. And every study shows that happiness is much more related to social relations with your friends and your family and to your sense of agency, what you're able to do in your own life, than it is to relating to what you have. So what we have is a very pervasive social norm for consumption that we need to disrupt over the next 10 or 15 years and replace with one that is much more humble and that puts us in the context of a larger world and also puts us treating each other better than what we have in the past 50 or 60 years. I hope I answered the question.
I think you did. So we have time for maybe one more question. The mic is already given, apparently, to someone. So it'll be two to have gender balance, so we'll need a woman to balance it out. And we did a lot of... We're there? Yeah? So Cyril, if you want to give the mic already. So Mr. Jan?
Perfect. We end with a woman. That's good. I have a question about monetization of externalities. My name is Frederick van der Bos. I work with Impact Finance Belgium, and this is one of the topics we're currently assessing to see the potential. I mean, if you want to manage something, you need to be able to measure this. A lot of people know about CO2, and it's very debated, but a lot more should be measured. And monetization of impacts or monetization of externalities is something many parties are already trying to do. Harvard Business School is one of them. The Impact Institute in Amsterdam is another one. You both sort of brushed over this topic. I wondered, you as an academic and you as an entrepreneur, have you come across this? Do you see potential in this? How crucial do you think this particular aspect could be to really help a lot of people with good intentions to translate this into good actions? Thank you.
Thank you. And the other question, if you can have a short question and we'll have short answers.
Sure. Thank you so much for the presentation. My name is Karina, and I have a question regarding policymaking and law. So instead of trying to enforce laws for environmental protection, do you guys have any examples in academia or in business where behavioral economics is used to nudge companies and decision makers to be more environmentally friendly in a way that creates a more win-win ecosystem? Thank you.
Thank you. So short answers, Erik?
So since we're short of time, maybe I take the first one, and maybe you're more knowledgeable in the second one, Vincent. What do you think? I can say something about that. Yes, we know how to trace these externalities, and there is an enormous, body of literature contributing metrical technology to understand, identify, and measure these externalities. Many of them can be monetized, but sometimes these externalities or this cost shifting that can take the form, of increased mortality, increased morbidity, damage to property values, but sometimes also more intangible type of values. I don't think money is always the most meaningful metric to capture these values, no? I would challenge you a little bit to the idea that if we don't measure something, we can't manage it. If we think of Notre Dame, I don't think it needs to justify its existence, do cost-benefit analysis every year to quantify its benefits and so on. As a society, we are ready to accept that it holds spiritual values, architectural values, cultural values, and so on, that justifies its existence and protection. And I think a similar approach sometimes we have to use with nature. Nature holds different types of values that get affected by business operations sometimes. Many of these costs are quantifiable, and we have the metrical technology and the methods to assess them. But sometimes we cannot measure translate all these costs into monetary terms. And sometimes physical metrics like loss of species, amount of contamination, and so on, may be more meaningful metrics to deal with these costs. No? So not every cost is commensurable in money. And at the same time, we do not want to turn all these things into money metrics because sometimes it can pave the way for undesirable commodification of environmental components that we do not want to be guided by market values and market norms. So I think monetization is a very powerful valuation language. Everyone understands it, policymakers understand it, but it should not be the only one. It should come along with other languages of valuation or the types of values.
Thank you, Erik. Vincent, do you want to answer the second question?
Yes, I don't feel very qualified to answer that question. I feel we both, I think, could have said more on the first one, or I could have said, but I think nudging. I think it's. I'll go back to this. What I would also say about measurement. I think one of the underestimated forces in business is the moral force, and that is that people use numbers to justify their instincts a lot in business, and both in terms of what direction the business could take and also what constraints a business should accept. Those are often motivated morally in some surprising ways. When we switched to organic cotton and we couldn't find a spinner to work with us, we ended up working with the largest spinner in the world one of the largest spinners in the world in Bangkok, who figured out how to freeze the cotton so it wouldn't gum up his machines. And later we asked him, we said, "We're so small, you're so big, why did you even talk to us?" And he said, "I guess you could just call me a closet environmentalist." And I think if you combine a kind of recognition of what we're facing in the world with clear direction and purpose for business and regulation, you start to see a way for business to unfold, and especially as practiced by the next generation, that may be very different from the assumptions that we're making today.
Thank you. I think the answer was very nice. Thank you, Vincent, for having the courage to answer it. So I've been too ambitious with the questions, so we have 5 minutes left, and I had promised both of you that you would have 3 minutes to close. So, physical limits, you will have 1 minute each. And then I will also be closing in a minute, I promise. So, any final word? My question was what business leaders should start and stop doing, referring to Latour's questions during COVID time, as Vincent has shared a pre-read material that was a video from Bruno Latour. I do recommend to see it. It's on our LinkedIn profile. But so you don't need to answer that question if you want. Just a final word in 1 minute, if you can.
Vincent?
Okay. I mentioned earlier that when we made the big announcement that the company had been that the stock had been donated to a foundation that would donate the shareholder profits to the environment, I mentioned that we made this big announcement, and then one of our employees came up to the CEO afterwards and said, "I'm not taking any more of your guff. I don't work for you anymore." And he was very surprised. She said, "I work for that tree over there." So now I have to take leave of you because I'm trying to rescue a tree in my backyard, and the woman who's going to address the fungus that's growing on it is at the front door. So I apologize that I will miss Erik's last minute, and I thank you very much for including me.
Thank you, Vincent.
And I will see. Okay.
So you don't hear the applause, but people are applauding.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your time.
All right. Thank you.
See you soon. So, oh, the PowerPoint presentation is, oh, thank you. Erik.
Okay, so I can't touch it. Maybe, I think I got to say most things I had in mind for today, but I think that's a broader reflection I could add in the end, and is that, you know, in this kind of emancipatory impulses of modernity, the revolutions we had and so on, I think we did a good job at putting checks on the accumulation of political power. We did so by dividing, you know, the 3 levels of legislation, government, and so on. But those revolutions did not bring about good enough tools to put checks on economic power. And I think this is one of the tendencies we are seeing today, that some economic actors are becoming just too powerful. So this is one of the things where I believe we will need some kind of revolutionary changes in the way we operate the economy. The second aspect that I could just recap very briefly is the idea that if we really want to move to sustainable business, I think we really have to go deep into aspects of the business design, no? Getting much more serious in, as some people are doing already, but it's far from the mainstream. Questioning quite deeply along the lines we have discussed today, ownership structures in companies, governance structures in companies, who is represented. Does, for instance, nature have a voice? Does affected people have a voice in the way we take decisions? And how we are dividing the financial returns, how we're allocating the financial returns. Here we have the classical conflict between capital and labor, but we are also witnessing a conflict between what goes to private profit and what goes to nature. Because nature is something in which we also need to invest and we need to repair in order to keep working life-supporting processes and so on. So I think this idea that nature, through environmental stewards, having a voice in the way we make decisions, but also employees and people affected through the supply chains, I think it's really fundamental to the shift towards sustainable business.
Thank you, Erik. I think we can also applaud Erik after his speech. I'm sure if you would go back, you would have Biss and Tercio that would make you come back on the stage. Thank you very much for accepting and having the courage to be in front of that crowd. I think it was very, very interesting and inspiring. I would like to take just one more minute. I'm sorry for the people who had to leave at 9 sharp. But I wanted to thank very much 2 people for having brought Erik and Vincent, which is Sibylle and Henry. Thanks to them, we had the chance to have them. I would also like to thank 2030's team, Cyril, who has supported all the logistics, Mathilde, Chantal, Sabrina, and Caroline. Yes, you can applaud them. And then I really, really want to warmly thank TheMerode, because it's very, very, very comfortable to be here, and the collaboration has been really outstanding. So please, thank you, Valentine, Maite, Johnny, for the contract. Thank you very much. We are closing here. I hope it was as interesting for you as it was for me. The bar is open if you want to buy a drink before leaving and keep on chatting a little bit. And we hope we'll see you again shortly. You can always register to our newsletters, and we'll send you the report really shortly. Thank you all very much.